He slammed on my cabin door, flashed a fake badge, and told me he was with the HOA police. What he didn't know was that I'm the head of state police. And what happened next? Let's just say, he picked the wrong door to knock on after 30 years of service, rising through the ranks, walking the line between law and chaos and seeing the very best and worst of humanity. I finally decided it was time to reclaim something I hadn't had in decades. Peace. Real peace. The kind you don't question, the kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket after a cold battle. I bought myself a cabin deep in the northern mountains, tucked away from the traffic, politics, and sirens of city life. It was the kind of place that didn't have neighbors within shouting distance. No HOA, no nosy passers-by, and certainly no community watch volunteers pretending to be something they weren't. Just me, my 2 old dogs, Bear and Duke, and the sound of wind rustling through the pines. Out there, I could finally breathe. I could sit on the porch with a cup of black coffee and a worn paperback, the kind with the spine cracked from years of rereads. No one demanded my time. No one needed me to solve anything. And for a man who'd spent his life answering 3 a.m. calls and delivering bad news to broken families, that silence was sacred. I kept the place simple. No gadgets, no security system, just instinct and habit. The same ones I'd developed after a lifetime of never letting my guard down. It was freedom, earned the hard way. Every weekend I drove up from the city, and every weekend I felt my blood pressure drop the moment I turned off the gravel road and saw the old green tin roof peeking through the trees. It was my slice of dignity, my sanctuary. And in a world that's quick to forget what men like us have sacrificed, it reminded me that I still mattered, that I still had the right to be left alone. So when, one quiet Saturday morning, a thunderous pounding hit my door like a battering ram, my body snapped to attention like it had in my patrol days. It wasn't a knock. It was a challenge. A warning. I stood up slowly, coffee still in hand, and looked through the window. There he was, mid-30s, sunglasses, stiff posture, and a tactical vest that read HOA Compliance Officer. I knew, instantly, he wasn't law enforcement. He wasn't even close. You see, a real badge doesn't come with mirrored aviators and a smirk, and no real officer needs to puff out his chest to get respect. But this guy, he strutted like he thought. He was judge, jury, and executioner, and he picked the wrong man to intimidate. Now let me pause just a moment and say this. If you've made it this far into the story, you're probably someone who values truth, respect, and the freedom to live life on your own terms. I don't take your time lightly. So if these stories speak to something inside you, if they remind you of what real dignity looks like in a world that too often forgets it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. This isn't just entertainment. It's about standing up for what's right, remembering who we are, and staying connected to stories that still mean something. I appreciate you being here. Back to the door. When I opened it, I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, steady, waiting. He introduced himself with an authoritative tone and started talking about routine property inspections, said he was from the Pine Valley HOA, and that there had been reports of non-compliant structures on my land. My land. The very land I had triple verified was outside any HOA boundary. The very land I'd purchased with my pension, free and clear. He told me he'd need to walk the perimeter, take photos, maybe issue a few citations, depending on what he found. His tone was pure condescension, the kind that comes from someone who's never had real authority but wants desperately to taste it. I asked him one question. Where exactly did you say your jurisdiction ends? He blinked, hesitated, and that hesitation was all I needed. Because in that half second, I saw it. He wasn't just overreaching. He wasn't just mistaken. He was lying. And the truth is, I've spent my life dealing with men who lie to control others. Sometimes it's in a uniform, sometimes it's behind a podium, and sometimes, like today, it's in the form of a self-appointed enforcer who thinks fear is a shortcut to power. But this wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. This wasn't a lost paper pusher who wandered into the wrong woods. No, this man had a plan. He thought I was just another aging retiree in a flannel shirt with soft hands and softer resolve. What he didn't know was that I still carry my badge. Not for show, not for nostalgia, but because I earned it, because I still live by the oath I took decades ago, to protect and serve, not just from criminals, but from imposters like him. And just as I stepped forward, ready to call his bluff and shut this charade down for good, he did something I'll never forget. He reached for the weapon on his hip. He didn't flinch. Not at first. He just stood there, chin up like he thought he was still in control, like I hadn't just pulled the rug out from under his boots. "I'm sure we can clear this up quickly," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. But I'd heard that tone 1,000 times before, from rookies who realized they'd just kicked in the wrong door, from suspects who thought charm could erase a lie. He had that kind of grin too, a tight one, more nervous than smug now. "Let's not escalate things," he added. That line right there told me everything. He knew he was losing the upper hand. See, when you've served in law enforcement as long as I have, you learn to read men not just by what they say, but by what they're trying not to say. His eyes darted, once to my dogs, once to the truck in my driveway, and finally back to me, trying to assess how much trouble he was in, how far he could still push this. "There's no need to involve outside agencies," he said. That made me chuckle. "Outside agencies? You mean actual law enforcement?" I stepped forward slowly, controlled, like I'd done in countless negotiations where the air was thick with tension and the wrong word could shatter the moment. "Because, son, I am the outside agency." He shifted uncomfortably, glanced toward the road like he was weighing whether he could make a quick retreat, but then something changed. Instead of backing off like any rational person would when confronted with the truth, he doubled down. "Sir, if you fail to comply with our inspection, I'll be forced to file a non-compliance report. That can lead to daily fines and even property seizure." His voice had that fake firmness now, like a bad actor trying to sound like a drill sergeant. I stared at him, stunned, not by his words, but by the boldness of the lie. Property seizure? Over what? And me? Imaginary tool shed violation? My land wasn't under any HOA, no neighborhood covenant, no community bylaws, nothing. Just raw, free property in the mountains where a man could still own his square of earth without answering to a board of self-important busybodies. And yet, here was this man, dressed in a $30 vest and carrying a clipboard, threatening to take that away based on nothing but confidence and a laminated badge he likely printed at home. And that's when it hit me. He wasn't here just to bluff. He was here because this scam worked on people. I could picture the widower down the road with arthritis in his hands and no family left nearby. Someone who'd panic when a guy in a fake uniform barked about fines and violations. I imagined the older couple I'd passed last week, still hanging on to their little cabin and retirement dignity, being told they had to cough up $500 for a deck violation they never committed. And worse, what if they paid? What if they lived in fear for weeks thinking someone could take their home? That realization made my stomach turn. This wasn't a game. This was a con, weaponized against the quiet, the respectful, the trusting, the kind of folks who spent their lives doing things the right way. And now, in their golden years, they were being shaken down like petty criminals. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice low and steady. "You're claiming full legal jurisdiction over land you don't own, for a homeowners association that doesn't exist out here, with a badge that doesn't match any law enforcement agency in this state. And you think you can scare me into compliance?" He opened his mouth, probably to spin some new lie, but I raised a hand. "No more talking. I want your full name, your ID, and the name of your direct supervisor." He hesitated. We don't usually give that out." I took a step forward. "Then I suggest you start doing things differently, because if you don't, you're going to find out what a federal impersonation charge feels like." That finally cracked him. His eyes widened for just a second before he looked away, pretending to check something on his clipboard. But I didn't let up. I leaned in slightly, just enough for my voice to drop into that low register, the one that told men like him that the situation had changed, that playtime was over. "You ever hear of Title 18, Section 912 of the United States Code?" I asked. He didn't answer, It's the one that deals with impersonating a federal officer. You're not there yet, but you're dancing close. And you better pray I believe this is just a dumb mistake instead of a deliberate fraud." He swallowed hard. "Look, I'm just doing what I was told. We've had success with this program in other communities." "Success?" I interrupted. "You call threatening retirees, collecting fake fines, and dressing up like a cop success?" That's when I noticed something in his vest pocket, a thick stack of printed notices. I pulled one out and read the top. Notice of immediate violation, payable within 72 hours. No agency seal, no case number, just scare language and a P.O. box in a different county. Not even a phone number to call, just a QR code leading who knows where. I turned the paper around and showed it to him. "How many of these have you handed out?" "I don't know," he muttered. "Dozens, maybe." "And how many paid?" He didn't answer. That silence was worse than a confession. That silence meant real people had been hurt, people who'd been misled, coerced, maybe even driven to despair by the fear of losing their homes. And suddenly, I felt something old rise up inside me. Not anger, not just yet. It was something deeper. Righteous fury, the kind I'd only felt a few times in my life. Like when we broke up that ring of fake VA scammers back in '09, or when we tracked down that predator targeting elderly war widows with fake utility bills. This man, this Brooks, he wasn't just playing dress-up. He was a wolf in dollar store clothing, sinking his teeth into the quiet lives of people who never expected to be preyed on in their own driveways. I took a breath, trying to steady my voice, but my hand was already reaching for the radio in my truck. "You stay right here," I said. "You're not leaving this mountain until we have this figured out." Are you detaining me?" he asked, backing up slightly. "Let's just say we're going to make a few phone calls and see how long your little uniform holds up under real scrutiny." And as I turned to grab my radio, I saw it. His hand moved, fast and nervous, toward the side of his vest, right where a pistol holster would be. That's when I realized he wasn't just pretending to be a cop. He was armed. He froze when he saw me dialing. That false sense of authority drained from his face like blood from a bad liar caught mid-con. "Sir, really, I think we've just had a mix-up here," he said quickly, eyes darting to the tree line like he was calculating how fast he could get to his car. "Let's not escalate this further." But I wasn't just calling to scare him. I was calling because something about this entire situation felt bigger than just one scammer with a clipboard. The call connected to dispatch, and I calmly gave them my ID number, confirmed my location, and asked for a local unit to respond for suspected impersonation and possible wire fraud. He started backing away slowly, muttering under his breath. "This is ridiculous. I'm just doing my job." I cut him off. "You're not a cop. You're not HOA. You're a criminal and you're done here." He stopped mid-step, mouth twitching like he was about to say something brave, but his courage had left the building. Just then, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. His truck, still idling on the shoulder of the road, had someone inside. A second man, same tactical vest, same cheap knockoff badge staring at me like a predator caught in the light. That's when I realized this wasn't a one-man show. This was an organized operation, a two-man team, maybe more, running a con, across rural properties, banking on isolation, confusion, and intimidation. And now I wasn't just dealing with a trespasser, I was dealing with a coordinated scam. And I had no idea how far it reached or who else had already fallen victim. I moved toward the second man's vehicle, but the engine revved before I could get close. He backed up fast, tires spinning gravel into the air, and disappeared around the bend. The fake officer in front of me, Brooks, glanced over his shoulder and made a choice. He ran, right into the woods, just dropped the clipboard and bolted like a scared teenager caught joyriding. I yelled after him to stop, warned him that fleeing would only make it worse, but he didn't even hesitate, just vanished into the trees, and within seconds, silence returned to the mountain. I stood there, holding a clipboard filled with phony citations, threats of foreclosure, and fake signatures from fake board members of an HOA that didn't even exist. My dogs paced nervously near the porch, sensing the unease in the air. What was supposed to be a quiet Saturday in the woods had turned into a standoff with fraudsters. and they weren't even finished yet. Dispatch called back. Nearest unit was 20 minutes out. I spent that time photographing everything, from the dropped clipboard to the tire tracks in the dirt. But the more I looked, the more I noticed. My mailbox, which I rarely checked, was stuffed with envelopes I hadn't seen before. Each one bore the same Pine Valley Estates Compliance Division logo. Inside were warnings, all dated weeks back, fines for noise violations, unapproved fencing, even supposed unpaid dues. None of it was real, but it meant they'd been planning this for a while. They had my name, my address, my property records. They were targeting me, not randomly, not mistakenly, deliberately. Maybe because they thought an old cop up in the mountains wouldn't know better. Or worse, maybe because someone fed them the information. That thought chilled me to the bone. Who gave them my name? Who told them where to find me? And if they found me, who else had they found? I started making calls to neighbors. What few there were. One elderly couple said they'd received similar notices but ignored them. Another man said he'd paid a $200 fine just to make them go away. That's when I felt the twist in my gut. People were falling for it. Good people, honest people. And if I hadn't caught them red-handed, I might never have known how close I came to becoming a victim myself. But even worse, I realized something wasn't adding up. One neighbor said they saw a man with binoculars parked near my cabin 3 days ago. Said he stayed there for nearly an hour and took photos. That's not a con artist looking for random marks. That's surveillance. That's targeting. My peaceful sanctuary wasn't just under threat. It was being watched, studied, hunted. That wasn't just betrayal. It was a violation of everything I'd earned after 3 decades of service. They weren't just after money. They were after control. Control over people who'd already done their time, paid their taxes, served their country, raised their families, and retreated to a quiet life. People like me. And someone had decided that even out here we couldn't be left alone, that we were still open game for exploitation. I stood there, staring into the trees where the man had run, clutching a clipboard full of lies. And that's when I saw it. Tucked inside the last page, hidden behind the fake citations, was a list. My name was circled in red, and right below mine were 6 others, all with addresses. All people I knew. All people who trusted me to protect this community. That's when the fear hit me, not for myself but for them, because it meant they weren't finished yet. They were just getting started. The air shifted the moment those 2 patrol cruisers crunched over the gravel road and came into view. That familiar flash of red and blue strobes bouncing off the tree trunks brought a wave of steadying calm to my gut. Like the cavalry had arrived. Not because I needed backup to handle some coward with a fake badge, but because it meant the wheels of real justice were finally turning. I knew both officers personally. One had done his rookie ride along with me years ago, and the other I'd recommended for promotion last fall. As they stepped out, I met them halfway and handed over everything. The clipboard, the envelopes, the list of names I'd found buried behind the citations. They scanned through it all, expressions tightening with every page. No one had to say it out loud, but we all knew what we were looking at. This wasn't some dumb kid playing cop for kicks. This was an operation, maybe even a syndicate targeting retirees and remote property owners, and it was working. "Sir," Officer Daniels said firmly as he approached the imposter, who was now trying his best to look harmless. "You're being detained for impersonating a law enforcement officer. Criminal trespass and suspected fraud." The man's face dropped like a bad poker hand. His eyes darted between us like he still thought he might talk his way out of it. No, wait. It's not like that. I was just doing what I was told. The HOA hired me. They gave me everything. The badge, the uniform, the paperwork. On property that's not even under their jurisdiction? I asked, cutting him off, my voice flat. "You're not enforcing anything, son. You're running a scam, and now you're caught." As Daniels cuffed him, the man started whining about how it was all just a misunderstanding, how he didn't mean any harm. But harm had been done. Thousands of dollars taken from elderly folks who didn't know better, or who were too scared to challenge what looked like official authority. I'd seen that kind of damage before. Not physical, but emotional, the kind that steals a person's dignity, makes them second-guess their independence. That's what made my blood boil. This wasn't just about money, it was about fear. Fear they were using like a weapon. We loaded him into the back of the cruiser, and then I took Officer Ramirez aside and told him everything I'd learned. How the HOA didn't exist, how they'd falsified documents, how at least 6 other names were targeted on that list. Ramirez nodded, jaw tight. I'll coordinate with county investigators. This is bigger than it looks. And it was. Over the next week, the investigation exploded. We traced bank records, examined fake HOA websites, followed the paper trail. The imposter we caught, whose real name was Paul Travis, turned out to be just a middle link in a much longer chain. There were others, people who ran the website, printed the fake citations, opened P.O. boxes to receive fine payments from victims. We found surveillance logs, car rental receipts, even blueprint-style property maps marked up with notes about compliance vulnerabilities. They weren't improvising, they were strategizing. And suddenly I realized, this wasn't just a con targeting backwoods cabins. This was a systematic attack on people they assumed were too far away, too old, or too worn down to fight back. But they were wrong. Because I wasn't just some retiree with a coffee mug and a porch swing. I was the head of state police. And now I was on a mission. I got a task force assigned, small, but effective. We worked quietly, reaching out to the other names on that list. Some had already paid the fake fines. Some had received threats that their homes would be seized. One elderly widow cried on the phone when I told her it was all a scam. She'd been hiding the notices from her children, afraid they'd think she couldn't live on her own anymore. That broke me. These con artists weren't just stealing money. They were planting doubt, undermining pride, robbing people of the very independence they'd worked their whole lives to earn. I made a vow that night. I wouldn't stop until every last one of these fraudsters was in cuffs. The media picked up the story a week later. I kept my name out of it at first, letting the facts do the talking. But once the first round of arrests were made in neighboring towns, people who had helped launder the money or distributed the fake notices, I agreed to do an interview. I sat down, looked directly into the camera and told every person watching, if someone comes to your door pretending to be the law, ask for credentials, real credentials. If they threaten you without proof, without legal documentation, call us. Do not give them a dime. You are not alone. You are not powerless. The response was overwhelming. My office received hundreds of calls, some tips, some victims, some just people saying thank you. And every one of them strengthened my resolve. That cabin, which once felt like a place to disappear, had become the center of a fight I hadn't seen coming. But one I knew I had to finish. The moment that truly shifted everything came when we raided a rented office space 2 counties over. That's where we found the servers used for the fake HOA websites. Dozens of names, dozens of files, voice recordings of scam calls, email, templates. It was worse than I thought. This wasn't a side hustle. It was a business, built on deception, thriving on fear. We took it all, locked it down, pressed charges. And when it was over, I returned to my cabin for the first quiet morning in weeks. The sun filtered through the pines like it always did. My dogs stretched out on the deck. I sipped my coffee, this time with the weight lifted. But as I sat there, my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I picked up. "Is this the officer who caught the HOA scammers?" the voice asked. Older, shaky, because I think they just showed up at my door. The days that followed that unexpected knock on my cabin door unfolded with a clarity and weight that changed something deep inside me. Not just as a man who'd spent his life in uniform, but as someone who finally understood how fragile peace really is when predators are left unchecked. That one encounter, that one clipboard, turned out to be the thread that unraveled an entire network of deception preying on the vulnerable. Paul Travis, the man who stood on my porch with sunglasses and a badge he printed at home, was just the tip of a very long, very dirty spear. By the time our investigation concluded, we'd identified 6 more individuals directly involved in the scam. A woman posing as an HOA secretary who made intimidating phone calls to seniors, a so-called compliance auditor who wore a shirt that said Code Unit 14 and took photos of homes in the middle of the night, even a graphic designer in another state who created the fake logos, citations, and forms, knowingly feeding a machine that lived off fear. They were bold, well-organized, and completely without shame. The charges stacked up fast: impersonating a public official, wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. The DA didn't flinch. And for the first time in years, I sat in a courtroom not as the one presenting evidence, but as the man who started the case with a coffee in hand and a quiet cabin in the woods. I watched as victim after victim testified, not with rage, but with the kind of broken dignity that makes your heart hurt. One man said he hadn't told his own children about the letters because he didn't want them to think he couldn't manage on his own. Another woman had paid almost $2,000 in late HOA fines, skipping medications to make sure she didn't lose her home. That's the real cost of scams like these. Not just money, but confidence, independence, and in some cases, the trust people had in themselves. I stood and gave my own testimony, not as a police chief but as a witness and neighbor who saw the game up close. I told the court what I'd seen in that man's eyes, the bluff, the nervous pivot, the way he looked at my land like he already owned it. I spoke plainly, and I didn't sugarcoat the impact. We all deserve to feel safe in our homes. That's not a privilege. It's a right. And anyone who tries to steal that from another person, especially our seniors, deserves every ounce of the law. The sentencing came quickly after the guilty verdict. Travis and his team received a combined 47 years in prison across various counts. But even more powerful than that was the community response. A group of retirees in a nearby town started a local watch coalition. No weapons, no patrol cars, just trained volunteers who help educate their neighbors about scams, how to spot fake credentials, and how to say no with confidence. My own department began hosting free workshops at libraries and senior centers, walking people through their rights in plain, simple terms. One woman approached me after one of those sessions, clutching her husband's old Air Force cap. "You reminded me," she said softly, "that we're not helpless, not forgotten." That meant more than any medal I ever earned. Back at the cabin, things slowly returned to the rhythm I'd missed. The dog still chased squirrels and slept by the fire. My coffee still tasted best on the porch, where the sun rose through the trees in long golden beams. But I did start keeping a small notepad next to the door, just in case. Not because I expect another knock like that one, but because I now understand how easily silence becomes complicity when we stop paying attention. Justice, I've come to believe, isn't just about courtrooms and convictions. Sometimes it's just about standing up when you hear something that doesn't sound right. It's about asking questions, even if you're the only one raising your hand. It's about protecting those who built this country long before us, who shouldn't have to fight these battles in their twilight years. I may be retired from the day-to-day grind, but the badge I carried for 30 years still hangs in my study, and it still means something. Not just authority, but responsibility. So if you're watching this and wondering what you can do, remember this. Listen when your gut tells you something's off. Speak up if you see someone getting pushed around. And don't ever be afraid to demand proof when someone claims they have power over your life. Real authority doesn't need to yell or bully. It just needs the truth. As for me, I'll keep my coffee hot and my porch chair facing the road. Because I've learned that the people who knock on your door don't always come looking for conversation. And next time one of them does, they'll find a man who's not just ready, but waiting. Because some things are worth protecting, even in the quiet of the mountains, especially there.